So Jeremy, it's nice to meet you. Spending 2 years, you said, with the wolves, right, studying them, and if you could tell us a little bit about what you do and Yellowstone Foundation, would be appreciated.
Sure. So my name is Jeremy Sunderraj. I'm a biological technician for the Yellowstone Wolf, Cougar, and Elk Project. And a big part of my job most of the year is education. So I'm out in the field, keeping tabs on the wolves, educating people about the wolves, and public outreach about the wolves. So some of the other stuff we do is research. We're involved in research. Every day we're out collecting data on the wolf packs and what their activities are in the landscape. We also do management of the park's wolves. So for example, if we have wolves that are habituated to people or coming too close to people, we'll deal with those situations. Right now we're in the middle of our winter study period, so it's a 30-day intensive winter study period where we're out every single day monitoring the Junction Butte pack, these guys that are sleeping right behind us, and we're basically recording all of their activity. So we're going to record like when they start traveling, when they're resting, when they're hunting, and the major goal of that is to determine the kill rate of the wolves. So anytime they make a kill, we're going to note that. We determine as best we can, what animals they're taking, the condition that those animals are in. So for every kill we detect, we also have a crew that'll ski out or snowshoe out or hike out to what we call a cluster of GPS points from the wolves' collars. And once we get to a kill, we'll take 3 different samples. So we'll take a tooth. We're looking from that to look at the age of the animal. We will saw the femur to look at the marrow of the animal to determine what condition the animal's in. And then for elk, we actually take the back foot bone, and that's to look for stunted growth of the animal. And by doing this, we can get a picture of kind of what wolves are feeding on, what they're selecting for in the landscape. And over the last 25 years, these winter study periods have furthered our knowledge of wild gray wolves more than anywhere else in the world.
So how has that impacted the landscape? How has it changed things? Right. I've noticed over the years the difference in the vegetation, the difference in the smaller mammals, the spread out of the elk, spread of the bison, so they're not congregated.
So it's definitely over-dramatized a little bit, but wolves do have impacts on the ecosystems. Having a large predator on the landscape definitely impacts the large mammals that are on the landscape. However, at the same time, when wolves were reintroduced, we saw increasing populations of mountain lions, we saw increasing populations of grizzly bears, all of which also prey on elk. We had a high elk harvest by humans. At the same time, we had a couple severe droughts and then a couple of severe winters. And all that worked together to kind of drive the elk population down, which then had its impacts on the ecosystem. So we see, because there are fewer elk, there's less vegetation, less browse, and because of that, we see, results with soil erosion, more willows along creek sides, and things like that. So wolves have definitely been big in changing the ecosystem, but that's not the only reason the ecosystem has been changing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, we obviously have climate change and things like that can impact it. I'm curious. So you said that with the increase of the wolf population, there's also been an increase in the bear and the cougar population. How do they correlate?
So, these large predators being present in the landscape, what basically happened is there were a lot of elk in the northern range of Yellowstone. So in 1995, when wolves were first brought back into the landscape, there were about 19,000 elk. Wolves came back, and of course in that kind of a situation, a predator is going to do really well. At the same time, cougars were coming back into the ecosystem. They also did really well. Grizzlies are taking mostly calves, so they also do really well. Wolves being back on the landscape provided additional food, like carrion, for grizzly bears, right? So grizzlies are coming in and scavenging on wolf kills. Wolves and cougars generally don't interact very. Their interactions are not they're not very friendly towards each other. So with mountain lions, a lot of times areas that wolves use frequently, we see are less used by mountain lions. And I think about a quarter of the mountain lion deaths that we record in the park are due to wolves. There's actually an article that just came out in Jackson Hole area that's saying, mountain lions or wolves mountain lion behavior is definitely impacted by the presence of wolves. Generally speaking, the wolves kind of went out in those situations.
I've noticed, online, just last month when the grizzly killed the elk in the river, right out in Hayden Valley, that people were sitting there for a long time and they get in photographs and you'd watch the bear catch it and stuff like that. And then at a particular time, the wolves either found it, right. or then would move in and challenge the grizz for that.
Yeah.
Those interactions usually work which way?
So it totally depends, right? Generally speaking, a big grizzly bear is always going to win those battles, a really big bear. However, if there's a lot of wolves in a pack, they'll win a lot of those battles as well. I think a lot of it actually has to do too with how hungry each individual or what each animal is, because these animals are always trying to avoid conflict if at all possible. But like on one of my tracking flights last month, I saw the Wapiti Lake pack actually with that same bear that killed the elk, and he was on a bison carcass. And the Wapiti Lake pack's a pretty big pack. There's like 24 wolves in the pack if they're all together, and they were all just kind of sitting there waiting for him to get off because this is a really big bear. And then we flew over the 8 Mile pack near Swan Lake Flats, and they had a bull elk kill in a pond, and an average sized grizzly bear came in, and then the wolves chased him off and were giving him a lot of a hard time. So it kind of just depends on the situation.
Right. So part of it, I think, would determine like how satiated the bear was and whether or not he wanted to jeopardize his own health by defending it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if either animal is hungry, they might, or if they're full, they might move off to one side or the other and bed down. The other animal will have a chance.
And tell us a little bit about the Junction Butte pack. You said I think they're up to 34 now.
Yeah. So the Junction Butte pack for several years has been one of the dominant packs in the northern range of Yellowstone. They formed in 2012, and this year because they actually had 4 different females that bred and produced 18 pups. And these 18 pups, as of right now, are all still alive. So they're arguably at least the 3rd largest wolf pack that's ever been recorded. At their peak, there were about 35 individuals.
And I think you said there's 25 blacks?
Yeah, 25. If they're all together, there would be 25 blacks and 10 grays, which is kind of a nice even number breakdown.
And then I think you were mentioning to me that there's a difference in the immunity with distemper.
Yeah. So Dan Staler, who's one of our project biologists, did a lot of his grad work on the color coat of wolves, and black wolves tend to have an increased immunity to disease than gray wolves do.
Bizarre.
And that's that gene comes from interbreeding with domestic dogs. So probably what happened is something kind of came along with that gene. But gray wolves tend to be more reproductively successful.
And then another interesting fact that you told me that I wasn't aware of was that most coyotes have a percentage of wolves in them?
In the eastern United States, yeah. So not so much here, but basically what happened as wolves were kind of wiped out of the eastern United States, the coyotes were colonizing the east, so they used to only live in the west or mostly live in the west, and the last few wolves are interbreeding with the coyotes. So that's why you see coyotes that can be quite a bit bigger than the coyotes here in the eastern United States.
So the term coy wolf, what does that really mean?
It's still just basically it's still a coyote.
Okay. The coyote with a higher percentage
There's
of
definitely wolf in those coyotes, but they're still considered coyotes officially.
Okay. So kind of like a little misnomer that's thrown
right,
out.
a little bit, yeah.
Sounds good for the hype.
Yeah.
And the controversy obviously still really exists.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we can always look at it as multiple ways. It's really easy as someone who comes here and sits here in Yellowstone National Park and watch the junctions, walk across the landscape to say, wow, wolves are such a beautiful animal, we need to preserve them, which is somewhat true. But if you've been in the situation where you're a rancher who loses livestock to wolves, a lot of those people do live paycheck to paycheck. They live day to day. And because of that, you have to be very considerate, because a lot of what goes forward into conserving these species is not what happens in national parks, but what happens on national forest land outside the park or private land outside the park. We can have wolves in Yellowstone, but if there are not wolves outside of Yellowstone, the species is not going to continue to exist. So the best way to come up with solutions is to kind of shoot the middle line. So for example, if all the people who are pro-wolf and all the people who are anti-wolf are not willing to work together, nothing will ever get accomplished. But if the people are able to work in the middle, we see a better chance at managing a species and conserving a species, right? Because there's a lot of people who think on one side that wolves should never die, which doesn't make sense, and other people think they should all be dead. And I've heard a lot of people out here that they come out and say, well, those ranchers just need to learn to take a loss, and that's really easy for us to say.
Yeah, sure.
Right? That's very
not
very
our
easy.
livelihood.
Yeah, but we've seen plenty of successful measures of living with wolves. Right. I used to work for a group in the Blackfoot Valley that would use non-lethal methods like fladry. They'd implement range riding and carcass mulching, and because of that, they eliminated predation over 16 or 17 years, or depredations from wolves. And over time, it was really interesting to see how well the ranchers and the trappers and the people from the biologists as well got along, and ended up being somewhat even good friends. And to the extent where we saw those ranchers and trappers, go from people who really hated wolves and wanted them all dead to people who, would still maybe kill a wolf, but
Right.
were okay having them on the landscape. And that's where the differences are made, right? So it's nothing gets done if you're just sitting there.
No, everything's
expecting-
multifaceted.
Exactly.
We have to take all of it into account and try and come up with a viable plan.
Precisely.
It's interesting for me. So they talk about like even the buffalo situation or the bison situation with brucellosis and all
Yeah.
that stuff and how it affects it, and they corral a certain percentage and cull others and all that. But the elk population also has it as well, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And they don't talk about that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an interesting one. So yeah, I mean, basically with wolves, it's similar to just politics or anything else, is that people will find information to support their side.
Exactly.
Right? People who really like wolves will find any reason to have wolves present, and the people who really hate wolves will find anything that's bad about wolves to say against them,
Right.
even though like both, probably need to find that middle ground.
Yep. Well, I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
It's been very informative to me, and I'm sure the viewers are getting a lot out of that. And thank
Yeah,
you.
for sure.
Continued success, and we
Absolutely.
appreciate what you do very much.
Yeah.
And the Yellowstone Foundation is extremely supportive, with all of this, and Canon's role in supporting the Yellowstone
sure.
Foundation, and
Yeah.
the green grass grows all around. So
Absolutely.
again, thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Appreciate it.
Yep.